Audio test one. Well, who knows? Okay, I'll text you and see if it's good time, then we'll.
I think 9, like 9 o'clock to noon, I'll probably be.
Okay, it's supposed to be kind of nasty weather tomorrow. Rainy, and I know, yeah. Hey, we missing somebody. I know the time says that it's time to start, but we're waiting on one member. And I know he's here, so we'll just wait until he gets here. I'd like to call this November 14th, 2022 regular meeting of the Rockingham County School Board to order. Welcome to those of you here. We have some students here tonight. Students, welcome. We'll try to get you out of here in time that you don't get any inclement weather before you. The first item on our agenda is approval of tonight's agenda, and I will entertain a motion in that regard.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Lohr. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Any questions, comments, or amendments? Hearing none, all those in favor of approval of the agenda as it is before you, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is 5-0. Thank you all very much. I would ask everyone who is here, as you are able, to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I was at a sporting event earlier this year, and when the national anthem played, the public address announcer said, "If you rise as you are able." And I thought that was a very nice thing for those who might not be able to stand. So that's why I've copied them on that. At this time, I would ask that you would join us in a moment of silence. Thank you very much. We will move into our public comment section of our meeting, and as always, there will be a timer. Welcome. There will be a timer on the screen, and I will gavel with 30 seconds left so that you may not have to watch the screen as closely, and that may give you some guidance. We will start this evening with Michael Stemple.
Thank you, Board. Thank you, Dr. Scheichel. Several weeks ago, I had the honor of attending a book launch of Out in the Valley, LGBTQ plus stories from the Shenandoah Valley. Several of the authors spoke about their personal experience in the Valley as LGBTQ plus individuals. Two things stood out to me. One, the importance of a personal autonomy to come out when one is ready. One student shared a story of how they were forcibly outed to their parents by a school counselor and how harmful that was. Number two, the other thing that stood out to me from these stories is the devastating impact of fundamentalist Christianity, I put that in quotes, air quotes with the little c, on the psychological and emotional health of the individual sharing these stories. As a person of faith in the Christian tradition, I'm appalled at the lack of compassion and love of those who claim to follow Christ, who told the story of a father who ran to embrace the prodigal son who would squander his inheritance even after he saw him from a distance. So these stories, some of the stories that I heard, reminded me of how Youngkin's proposed model policies will be harmful to trans kids and the wider LGBTQ plus community. And just as a reminder, the guidance of the policy itself does not follow the guidance of the legislation that it claims as its statutory authority. So Delegate Marcus Simon, who wrote the legislation that was cited as the legislation to make the policy, one of the issues it was supposed to address is address common issues related to transgender students in accordance with evidence-based best practices. And of course, the proposed policies that are cited, they cite no evidence and are contrary to the best practices of the treatment of transgender students. So again, I encourage you to reject the model policies proposed by the Youngkin administration as
David Stoltzfus, did I butcher that last name? I apologize if I did. Stoltzfus, okay, thank you.
I'd just like to share a story, if I may. Our son started his formal education at Mount Clinton Elementary School, and he graduated from Turner Ashby in 2003. And for his college experience, he chose to go to Messiah College up in Pennsylvania. At the end of the first semester, when the grades came out, he was up in the dorm room, and one of the young men that lived on that floor came up to him and said, Jonathan, I don't know what to do. And Jonathan said, what's the problem? He said, look, I made a B, 2 C's, and a D. And he says, you know good and well that I want to go to graduate school in physical therapy. This ain't going to cut it. What am I going to do, Jonathan? What are we going to do? And Jonathan said, okay, 2 things. Number one, I'll be happy to help you understand any scientific theory or any questions you have. I'll be happy to help you until you can understand your questions about science. And he said, okay, all right, you do that, Jonathan. What's number 2? Jonathan said, number 2 is you're going to have to work your butt off. And he says, what does that mean? He said, what that means is when other kids are going home for the weekend to be with mom and dad or to visit your girlfriend, you're going to be here studying in the science center. You're going to be here studying in the library. Wherever the best place is for you to be studying, that's where you're going to be studying. Oh, I think it was different for that young man to have that explanation done for him. Well, when we went to Jonathan's graduation, he had a young man with him, and he had his arm around him, and he said, Mom and Dad, I'd like you to meet so-and-so. And we're like, oh, hello. It's good to see you. And he said, Dad, Mom, this is a young man that needed help back there in the wintertime. And he got his acceptance for graduate school 2 weeks ago. So we gave him congratulations. And the purpose of the story is that this young man had ability, but without hard work, it wouldn't have happened. Thank you.
That concludes our speakers who have signed up for tonight. We will move to board member comments. I will begin with Mr. Falk. Thank you, sir. Dr. McQuilkin.
Thank you, Mr. Bree. This evening, one of the highlights I have is the Veterans Day programs that were celebrated all over our county schools. And I think it's what we need to do to say thank you to our veterans. And I'm very pleased and proud of the faculties and students in our schools who took the time and the initiative to say thank you to our veterans. That was my number one. And my number two is an upcoming event at Elkton Middle School tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock, I believe. There's going to be a raucous basketball game in between the faculty at Elkton Middle, and they're raising funds for the Monica Pence Barlow Educational Grant in Literacy through the Rockingham Educational Foundation. So if anybody is interested, I'm sure they would love for you to come and buy a ticket to watch them have a great evening of fun.
Ms. Lohr?
Sorry, I wasn't able to be with you all at the last meeting. And this is hard for me because I was at the National FFA Convention, had an amazingly great time, and I want to be like screaming off the top of the rooftops that my kids did a really great job, but that's a little embarrassing. So, but okay, let me say please that my middle son was a national winner FFA Proficiency Award in poultry, which is a really great thing for Rockingham County in general, because that's where we get our bread and butter a lot of the time. So yay, they're definitely learning great things in FFA, and I can't thank the FFA program enough for letting me attend with them. And we just had an amazing time. I got to go with the East Rock team, dairy judging team. They met a coach from Wisconsin who couldn't believe that these young people were representing Virginia in dairy, because not one of them lived on a dairy farm. And that was quite an accomplishment for them. And I just had a great time getting to know those kids. And I got to build relationships with lots of our students. And guys, we got some really great students out there. And it was just a pleasure to get to go. And they're just great things happening around Rockingham County. So I came home and I went to the legislative breakfast, and we got to talk to Dr. Scheichel, and I were able to attend, and with several of our delegates representatives, and got to kind of advocate for things for our schools, and got to work with other school districts to advocate on behalf of our kids. And that was a great morning with a lot of great conversation. And those were the two big highlights of my couple of weeks. So thank you all.
Thank you. Mr. Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Breeden. I have the opportunity tonight to introduce a few awesome soccer players, varsity soccer players from Spotswood High School, and they're going to take my time in the highlights tonight. But the next couple months, we get to highlight and really say thank you to all the work that Dr. Scheichel has done for Rockingham County Public Schools. And so tonight I want to invite up three awesome people here tonight: Sophia Galino, Maggie Thorpe, and Fiona Thompson, and they have something to present to their coach, Coach Oscar Scheichel, for the varsity girls program at Spotswood High School.
Thank you for having us first. Dr. Oscar Scheichel is more than an educator. He's the epitome of a leader. He's given us the advice that we carry throughout our lifetime. He has always been pushing us to be the best players we can be, but more importantly, the best people we can be. Oscar has shown us that we are more than just students. We are strong, independent voices who can make a difference both on our teams and in our communities.
His commitment to us as students has not gone unnoticed, and through tough times, we still feel heard and seen in his eyes. There have been some big changes made for the county these past years, and we have appreciated all the time and research he has poured into keeping us safe and still learning. It has been more than a rough few years for everyone, and one lesson he has emphasized to us is that nothing comes easy. Whether it's a job interview, a college application, or a district title, it is not possible without hard work. And that is what Coach Oscar is, a hardworking, dedicated educator and coach.
Oscar, we are more than grateful to have had you as our superintendent, and we thank you for always putting us first because no one remembers second place.
Well, thank you to the three of you and to Mr. Cross. Looking forward to starting out of season work in early January, so be ready. And yeah, I can't wait for the spring again. So definitely my favorite part of the year. And so many amazing students and student athletes who know that it's about playing the game the right way, not just about what's on the scoreboard at the end, but to do it the way it's supposed to be done. And that's just quality play and high ethics and all the things that make these ladies and the rest of the team so special. So thank you so much. That was my highlights.
Yeah. Did you have more, Mr. Cross? I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. That was yours?
Yeah, I think the others, Ms. Lohr had already talked about FFA convention and legislator breakfast. So I'll leave it at that. They were both wonderful events. And yeah, so many good things going on. Again, Veterans Day events. But yeah, this is a highlight I can't top. So
Yeah. Thank you to the three of you. Those comments, I think, would be shared by most everyone up here. It has always been about doing it the right way and doing it for the right reasons. And your remarks are spot on. Thank you. My highlight, I got an opportunity to attend Donut and Juice event at McGackey'sville Elementary with my grandson, who is in the pre-K program there, and was just absolutely blown away by the work that the teachers and reading specialists are doing there to teach those kids to read, and the progress that my grandson alone has made. Kudos to the pre-K teacher and to the staff there and to the principal and everyone involved. I left there kind of jaw hanging, really, amazed at what those young kids were doing. So, and we could go on with stories like that all night long if we wanted to or had the time to. But thank you to all of those hardworking people across the county. And it's certainly not a highlight, but certainly our thoughts are with the UVA community tonight, as once again we have seen violence up close and unfortunately had to see its ugly face again. So we will move to action items. Board members, we do have need to approve the minutes, and if it be your desire, I will entertain a motion in that regard.
I move that we approve the minutes of the October 24th meeting as presented.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes as presented, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That is 5-0. Bills and mileage.
you have the October bills and mileage in your materials, and I recommend approval of both as presented.
Thank you, Dr. Scheichel. Board members, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Do I hear a motion in support?
I move that we follow the superintendent's recommendation and approve the October 2022 bills as presented.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Lohr. Any questions or comments?
The only thing I would ask is, I brought it up at the beginning of the year, but if we could, on these bills, I saw there's a lot of just purchases from Amazon, and I know we all love Amazon to deliver stuff fast into our door. But if we could at all possible, buy locally, that I would love to see that, to spend more of our taxpayer money here locally to help local businesses, especially in the economy that we have right now. So if that could be a message that could be sent on through the superintendent's office to all employees to do their best to buy locally, I would appreciate that.
Thank you. All right, any other questions, comments?
I'm just going to add to that, when you do use Amazon, everybody, this is for everybody. When you do use Amazon Smile. And then you can, I have Riffy as my charity. You can pick a charity and a portion of your purchase price doesn't cost you any more, but it goes to the charity that you pick. And Riffy is one of those charities. So when we do rack up these bills from Amazon, hopefully we can get a couple of cents back on each one.
All right, all those in favor of approval of the recommendation and the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's 5-0. Field trips, Dr. Scheicher.
You have a number of field trips for approval tonight. East Rockingham High School TSA Student Leadership Retreat, November 18th through the 20th, 4 to 8 students to Camp Piankatank, Hartfield, Virginia. Spotswood High School All Virginia Jazz Ensemble, November 15th through the 17th, 2 students to Richmond. Elkton Middle School TSA Officer Leadership Training Conference, November 18th through the 20th, 8 students to Hartfield, Virginia. MTC is sending students to the Skills USA State Competition in April 21st through the 23rd. Not quite sure yet how many students will qualify for that, but that's in Virginia Beach. And then a national competition following that, depending on how many students qualify, June 19th through the 23rd in Atlanta, Georgia. Turner Ashby High School Marching Band, April 13th through the 16th, 45 students to New York City. And J. Frank Hilliard Middle School Kidwin Solar Team Visti Conference, December 4th and 5th, 6 students to Virginia Beach. And I recommend approval of all those field trips.
Thank you, Dr. Scheichel. You've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Do I hear a motion in support?
I'll make a motion to follow superintendent's recommendations on these field trips.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that is unanimous as well. Family Life Education Textbook Resource Adoption, Mr. Rice.
Hello, Chair Breeden, other school board members, Dr. Scheichel. My name is Sheldon Rice, and I'm the coordinator for Health and Physical Education. House Bill 1023 amended Virginia Code 22.1-207.1 Family Life Education to include prevention of human trafficking. In an effort to be in compliance with Virginia Code, the school board approved a committee to look at teacher resources related to human trafficking. Our committee looked at 2 curriculums, the Prevention Project and Bodies Are Not Commodities. As a committee, we recommend using the Prevention Project. We chose this curriculum for multiple reasons, some of which include that it is age appropriate and the materials are eye-catching and easy for students to understand and for teachers to navigate. It would be free to our school division thanks to a partnership with New Creation, who would also provide local support to teachers. Also, the resource has a teacher training module to help teachers become familiar with the material. We ask that you vote to approve the Prevention Project for the FLE curriculum to address human trafficking. Thank you.
I do recommend approval of the Prevention Project for the Family Life Education Program to meet the new state standards.
Thank you, Dr. Scheichel. Again, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Do I hear a motion in support?
I'll make a motion to support the superintendent's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Any questions or comments?
I'm happy that we went with the New Creations. I think it's what it is. Local lady. It's been doing this for a number of years, and so I'm excited to see the curriculum as well of what's being taught. So thank you guys. I know it's. Please tell the group that got together and reviewed everything. Thank you for doing this and taking time out to do it.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I will send a message on.
All right, thanks.
Other questions, comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That is 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Rice. Thank you. Information items, RCPS Capital Improvement Plan, Dr. Scheichel.
School board members and members of the public, as you know, we worked with the Capital Improvement Plan Committee from Rockingham County for the last few years to develop the next iteration of the CIP. And this is basically an update of what we talked about last year and the revisions that we included this year. So you have a better sense of the capital projects that are coming and what they are based on. When we look at our schools' capacity, there are, again, over the last few years, we've looked at getting resources aligned so that capacity per grade level is the same throughout the schools. So if elementary schools in an attendance area fill up, we would want the middle schools to fill up and then the high schools fill up. And we're not aligned everywhere. Spotswood's actually fairly well aligned, but that's of course also the area where the county is growing because of the urban development area. TA is also well aligned. And then the other two attendance areas, East Rockingham, the high school is basically really big for what the capacities are below it. And then in Broadway, the high school is actually the bottleneck. And so that thinking, went into the improvements to the capital improvement plan and the changes. These are the Broadway attendance area. You can see that we have, per grade level, 91 open seats basically at the middle school, and then about 94 at the elementary level, and then at the high school, that's only 27. And so that's where the bottleneck is. That's addressed in the capital improvement plan. So as you're aware, the Broadway High School expansion will get underway shortly with Broadway High School then having the capacity to add students, and we expect that to be completed in 2024. East Rockingham attendance area, there's plenty of elementary capacity per grade level. The middle school is where the bottleneck is. And again, we've talked about this at this point. They're just a little bit over, the 15 students over for the entire building, so about 5 over per grade level. And if, for example, there's additional capacity or additional students coming through, for example, if Grottoes grows, then the middle school may be too much overcapacity where you can't just add maybe 1 or 2 trailers. And as we've talked about before, the one solution, for example, if you want to avoid having to expand the middle school, is to send 8th grade into a separate wing at the high school. It's fairly self-contained. That's a conversation we keep having, with the middle school. But ultimately, that's one solution that's there. Again, we always want to find a balance between, traditional middle school education there, where all the 3 grade levels are together, but also, the cost of an expansion. You'll see that here in a little bit. Expanding a school is tremendously expensive. And so there is one safety valve, and that is moving 8th grade over. And because East Rock has so much capacity left, you really could have a separate wing. So you don't have all these interactions all the time where, the 8th graders would be with the high school seniors. And so that's one of the approaches there. But that's not an immediate concern. There's not a tremendous growth in that area at this point. So we'll be good for a little while longer. Spotswood, again, the high school there has a little bit capacity left, but not much, right? Same for the other levels. So when you look at elementary, middle, and high combined, that's where the crunch still is. Even with having redistricted some areas, that will have to happen again until the high school and the middle school are expanded. And so we also see that, Cub Run and Peakview, they're simply filling up too. In fact, Cub Run, even though there's capacity left, you have a school for 800 students on paper with 715 and one gym and the cafeteria the way it is. That's already pretty full in those additional areas. And so that's going to be one area that will have to be addressed fairly soon, and the expansion of Broadway provides a safety valve there. And then TA, that's actually in the best shape of all the attendance areas. Certainly there's some development coming in the TA attendance area, but we're looking pretty good there with 67 per grade level, right? This isn't overall the excess capacity at TA. They have room for another 267 students. So the Capital Improvement Plan Committee got this update as well, and this is what they've worked through now in terms of prioritizing projects. So Broadway is the case where we're not asking the county to, borrow money to build the addition at Broadway. That's money that's available through end-of-year funds, through some of the funds we've saved actually during the pandemic. And that allows us to build that expansion without asking taxpayers for additional funds. And in fact, the last time you saw the presentation a little bit over a year ago, we were talking about a price tag that was about $5 million lower. So this is now at $17.5 million, but we're still able to make that happen. And so again, the expectation is that by summer 2024, that expansion will be completed. And so what that means in terms of redistricting, that is a conversation that will have to happen this upcoming calendar year. So with the school expanding in the summer of 2024, scheduling takes place that begins in early January. And there's also, the whole budget process of staffing and all the other resources that are needed. That will have to be a conversation beginning next spring and then through the fall to make a final decision. It's one of the few areas actually where I've received repeated requests from families to be redistricted. It's highly unusual, right? We don't usually see that. But when Spotswood was split and East Rock opened, there was a lot of excess capacity at Spotswood. And so the Route 11 North area was redistricted into the Spotswood attendance area. And there have been some developments there that have been built over the last few years. And a number of families have reached out and said, why is my child on a bus for 45 minutes or whatever it may be over to Cub Run when Lacey Springs just up the road? And so that Route 11 North corridor, it is a high school attendance area change, of course. But when you look at where we are at Peakview, where we are at Cub Run, and where we are at Spotswood, that's the most logical move. And even though, it's always a mixed bag, right? Not everyone will be thrilled about changing that high school attendance area. But again, that's not been in the Spotswood attendance area, very long, but long enough that you don't have students that were redistricted and now have to go back, right? They've been there long enough that that's not where you're sending students back that at one point already, were Broadway and then had to switch. So that certainly will help quite a bit in the Spotswood attendance area at all three levels. Because as, Cub Run students then move up into Lacey, and some of that may involve some line changes in the Broadway elementary attendance areas, because they won't all neatly fit into Lacey, but there's some room at Linville Edom. There's some room, if Fox Run, for example, has room. I know that's not where those students would go, but some John C. students can move over if you move over one road. So there are some elementary adjustments that can be made. And again, that will help in the area that has the strongest pressure, which is Spotswood. Then Elkton Elementary renovation. Again, we've talked to, Ms. Mast has already been in contact with the county repeatedly because some of those decisions, again, we have to know this fall that we can move forward, and that looks good in terms of where they are prioritized. So Elkton Elementary, that's a $19 million renovation. There's an HVAC system in there that's 50 years old. And so asbestos abatement, you see that consistently. These kitchen updates, windows, circuits, And the expectation there would be that that's completed by September 2025. Also McGahkeysville, similar timelines. So those two would be simultaneous. And again, there's an HVAC system that's outdated, same kind of upgrades as you have at Elkton Elementary. Massanutten Technical Center, in the last iteration of this conversation, that was unknown where that would fit in, because we hadn't really completed all the steps in terms of looking at, what would Harrisonburg City, for example, be able to, not what they would contribute, because that's set, it's 80-20 for facilities, but the timeline for that. So we've been talking to city schools as well. And certainly those of you who did the walkthrough at MTC saw the need for upgrades there and a small expansion as well. And that just came very quickly, right? So we tried to fit that in. And the way the pricing works with the expansions at Spotswood and also at Montevideo, the price tags per year don't really change much if you slide MTC in, and then Spotswood and Montevideo are pushed back 1 year. That postpones those by a year and makes MTC possible. Again, there's no, with these, there isn't a green light, where the school board has requested the funds. So this is still a couple of years out, but it's certainly the next one then on the radar because of the needs at MTC. And again, a few new programs would be added there. Spotswood High School, and you can see, that's an expansion of a high school. The price tag for renovation and expansion. The renovation was already going to be quite expensive for the existing building, but given the needs in the urban development area, we decided, to also propose an expansion of that. And so that's a price tag of $70 million, and you can tell, how quickly the cost of building has gone up. Again, renovation, that was already in the plans, and then again, the growth in the UDA kind of requires, ultimately, even if you use that, Route 11 North safety valve, it's going to continue to grow, right, the UDA. And so the completion date there would be 2029, and then followed by Montevideo, again, in aligning capacities, completion date 2030. So we're talking, 8 years out, that completion date. So there are some additional ways capacity can be shifted, but not, not forever, right? And so certainly some of this depends on the economy, how much the UDA is going to grow. And of course, once you expand Montevideo and Spotswood, as you saw, they're currently fairly well aligned with the elementary capacity. So if you expand the high school and the middle school, now you're going to be still short some elementary capacity. And a couple of options to consider down the road. One would be, whether a new elementary school should be built. We had last year looked at, the different options. What would it cost, for example, to build a new high school? That was, you read some of that in the media. And then turning Spotswood into middle school and Montevideo into elementary school, that would be way more expensive than to actually expanding the high school, expanding the middle school, and building a new elementary school. But with, and a new elementary school would be somewhere in that UDA, if at all possible. But there are some other creative options as well, because in other attendance areas, the TA attendance area with Pleasant Valley, in the East Rock attendance area with McGahkeysville Elementary School, there are schools that have significant capacity. So for example, McGahkeysville is just a couple miles down the road. And because there's capacity, one consideration, for example, could be to simply say, one class or two classes in each grade level, even though they remain in the Montevideo Spotswood attendance area, their classes at the elementary level simply take place at McGahkeysville Elementary School. So a number of school divisions, have elementary schools that are split. The students stay together. The kids that come out of the Spotswood attendance area, they stay together. So they're with the kids that they're going to move through through those years with, but they may attend at a different school. Again, those are all just ideas. The timeline is far enough in the future that that can be discussed at some point, whether that's an elementary school or finding creative solutions to let kids attend in a building where there is room. And so that's really, I don't think that would be particularly controversial in that case, because again, they'd stay together and they'd move through. And yeah, that's the plan for now. Again, this went to the Capital Improvement Plan Committee a few weeks ago. And then a couple of weeks ago, again, the priorities were presented by the CIP committee, and they align well with what we have. And again, the county's working through what that would mean in terms of debt service. But all of these are on the radar. And then again, of course, as the projects happen, you would get that information. And then, of course, there are the official requests. So this is just with the CIP committee, the conversations that we've had, how we can move forward in keeping our facilities modern. We just recently, leadership team and I attended the VASS conference, Virginia Association of School Superintendents. And one of the main requests, from many, many school districts has been capital funding, because facilities are not in great shape. And you come to Rockingham, it's one of the first things everyone who visits comments on is how amazing our buildings are. And that's because the school division and the county have worked together over the years to keep these facilities updated, to make sure that, again, that the square footage cost is kept at a reasonable level without sacrificing educational quality. And when you walk into the buildings that have been renovated, even though from the outside you can tell that's a building from the 50s, you walk in and you feel like you're in a brand new school. So Steve Reed's done a marvelous job with our buildings, and he and Cheryl work together all the time to make sure that what we propose is fiscally responsible, but also supports our education goals. And so, yeah, this is the plan for moving forward, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Has the committee looked at Elkton Middle School, their cafeteria and the size that is? And I know that they can't fit all the kids for grade level when they're breaking up from eating in classrooms and different areas, and they can't get everyone in the cafeteria. So have we looked at expanding that at all?
Yeah, so at this point, Elkton Middle is not on the horizon. I think that would happen, in combination with either talking about expanding Elkton Middle School, period, right? Or again, if you move the 8th grade over to the high school, then that solves that problem all by itself. And again, we've had these conversations, right? There's, because 8th grade is fairly self-contained, it's the most logical step, at least for a while, right? We've done it the other direction at one point, with 5th grade. And so if there's so much space still at the high school that to create an 8th grade wing would really make sense, at least for a while, until, because then, expanding the cafeteria and not expanding the school, when you have those numbers, I'm not sure that would make sense. Right? When you do a project, you want to combine that, just like we're doing at Spotswood. It's a renovation and an expansion. So I think that would be discussed probably, again, since you're already over, it would be in combination with an expansion of the school, if that's the goal. And again, moving 8th grade to a high school, even though it's a move and it's unusual for here, that's actually, there are quite a number of school divisions that have high schools that are 8 through 12. And so I think that's probably the way in the short term you would go. But we have not, again, for everyone who's listening too, there have been no decisions, right? That, this year, 8th grade's going to go over to school. There's a little bit of time, at this point, where you can still wait and then make a decision whether, if developments, happen where we expand the number of students that we have in that attendance area, then maybe an expansion of Elkton Middle School is the answer. But if you're staying where you are, then either, you move that grade level over, or you talk about,
Right, because the expansion at Broadway High School will drop the numbers in Spotswood's attendance area. I think even though we have growth right now, that'll drop the numbers at Cobb Run and Peakview and Montevideo as well. And right now we're over capacity at Elkton Middle School. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
What does moving the 8th grade do to our fine arts and our CTE programs, who are typically split between like 6th, 7th, and 8th grade?
Yeah, so in some areas, certainly there has to be some creative scheduling, right? One of the, if you have, for example, TA and Pence, you have quite a bit of distance, right? East Rock and Elkton Middle School, that's fairly close. So, we have that in other areas where teachers for, either for one of the 2 days or for some periods of the day, the afternoon at a different school. With CTE programs, certainly there can be some integration with the teachers that teach at the high school, so you can expand that. So there are a number of options you have there. We certainly wouldn't expect students to then not have access to the programs. And there's some advantages too, right? So of having the eighth graders there, because they can participate in some programs that the high school runs, and where it's appropriate, you can then take advantage of that.
Go ahead.
And should we consider redistricting the middle school and elementary schools this year into the Broadway district, since that, or, I mean.
You could. It's mid-November. Again, those schools start working on budget now. I think that that work takes more time than you have to make that decision so quickly, right? So we've looked at some lines, but again, I think that's a conversation for the 23 calendar year. I think it's good to take the time to see, what happens if you move, for example, the line for Folks Run, because, Folks Run, for example, you have some really small classes. And so adding students doesn't mean you have to add staff there, right? So adding to some of those smaller schools, Linville, Edom, in some grade levels as well, you actually across the board then lower class sizes a little bit, because right now if you have 26 students, for example, in a class at Folks Run, you're not going to leave that as one class. So you have 13 and 13. And so if you shift kids in, you can add, another 8 kids in each of those classes without having to add a teacher, but that reduces then class sizes at those schools that you're pulling from. And so I think it's a more comprehensive look. And, we talked about this, whether because the high school is going to be finished, you could, in theory, alleviate the pressure on Cub Run and Peakview next summer, right? Even the middle school. You could move those because it doesn't yet affect the high school. But I think if you want to take a more comprehensive approach to shifting some of the other lines, again, not all the students in the Route 11 North Corridor would have room at Lacey. So there has to be some shifting. I think it's better to take the time and do that. We would talk about that early spring. And, a decision could be made if everyone feels comfortable before the summer, and otherwise it's a decision for the fall. But we'd certainly bring proposals in the spring.
I'm already leading a coalition to grandfather all our soccer players into Spotswood, so they won't have to leave the attendance area.
Yeah, these 3, I think, would not be affected. But there is certainly the possibility, I think, of some students that live in that Route 11 North Corridor. I'm not sure how much it affects the boys' team. I'm not aware of anyone on the girls' team. But as you know, that, of course, will be the basis for all my decisions. I'm just kidding.
Yes, let's make that clear that you're just kidding.
Yeah.
And my question was basically from a standpoint of kids building relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably stuff that we can also do. I mean, the kids in the Route 11 North area are probably already playing soccer with the kids at Broadway, aren't they? And there's probably things that we could do to maybe build relationships.
Sure. In many environments. And again, there's always that year when the move happens, right? So whether that happens this spring, or this summer, or the following year, there's already a group of students, of course, that are together. You're not moving just 2 or 3 that are in a new environment. And there are all kinds of events that those students participate in together, and when we talk about sports, for example, you have travel soccer, rec soccer, that's you have, all the basketball leagues at Horizon's Edge and whatever else it may be, the swim team up in Broadway. So again, in many ways, this isn't based on school attendance lines in all these cases. And so, yeah, again, I think there will be that point, and whether that's sooner or the following year, I'm not sure that is a critical difference. I think it's better to take the time and draw these lines in a way that they can remain then for a while.
First, I apologize for my coughing. I don't know if it was the price tag that had me choked up or the fact that we were talking about 2031 already. But I would just issue a word of caution. I obviously won't be around to participate in that decision-making at that point, but with expansion at Spotswood High School, the last time we looked at that, there were restrictions upon us due to just the land that we own. It's a very long, narrow plat of land, and currently the school kind of goes side to side. So the only areas for expansion were back or forward. Mm-hmm. Back toward the mountain, there's the issue of limestone that is quite significant. Out toward the front, you eliminate parking, you get into potentially playing fields, and a sinkhole that was there. And so I'm sure that all of that has been considered this time. I certainly hope so. But I think if it's not, we need to revisit that before we put all of our eggs, so to speak, in the basket of eventually heading towards an expansion of Spotswood. Up is not an option, or it wasn't at that time, Steve, because when a building is built, it has to be built so that it can support what goes on top of it. And then the issue of the railroad tracks remains an issue with that school as you increase the number of students who potentially move in there. And I'm well aware as I look at these numbers of the costs of building a new high school, but at the time that we were looking at East Rockingham High School, what is now East Rockingham High School, those were very real limitations that were placed upon us with regards to expanding Spotswood. So I just sort of bring that historical perspective back into it. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I don't think the expansion of Spotswood this time would be at the scale that you would have needed it in terms of, adding East Rock, right? So that would be a couple hundred students.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, sir. Good report. 2022-23 accreditation report. Ms. Cheryl Estep.
Mr. Breeden, Dr. Scheichel, members of the board, and those in attendance. I am pleased to share our division's 2022-2023 accreditation report. Accreditation standards in Virginia include multiple indicators. In addition to pass rates for all students on the SOL assessments, accreditation standards have school quality indicators that address achievement gaps and student engagement. In order for a school to be accredited, all school quality indicators must be at either level 1 or level 2, or the student must be under an accreditation waiver. Schools who have been accredited for 3 consecutive years are granted a waiver for 3 years. During this waiver period, schools are designated as accredited. Schools who have any school quality indicators at level 3 will be designated as accredited with conditions. In order for a school to be denied accreditation, the school must fail to adopt or fully implement required corrective actions to address level 3 indicators. For the 2022-2023 school year, 89% of Virginia's public schools are accredited. In Rockingham County, all of our 23 schools are accredited. 4 of our schools were accredited under the 3-year waiver. These are the school quality indicators that are used to determine state accreditation. The achievement indicators in English, math, and science include the SOL results for all students. The achievement gap indicators in English and math include SOL results for subgroups of students. Schools also earn levels for the school quality indicators listed under student engagement. This year, chronic absenteeism was not considered when determining a school's accreditation status, but it will resume as an indicator in 2023, 2024. The high schools also earn levels for graduation and completion and dropout rates. Beginning in 2023, the College and Career Readiness Quality Indicator will also be included. The level for the Academic Achievement Indicator is determined by the pass rate for all students on the SOL assessments. 22 of our schools earned a level 1 rating for English, and one of our schools earned a level 2. For math, all of our schools are rated at level 1. For science, 16 of our schools are rated at level 1, 4 schools are rated at level 2, and 3 schools are rated at level 3. A school's achievement gap indicator, they are determined by the English and Math SOL test performance of the 8 student subgroups. The subgroups include Asian, Black, White, Hispanic, multiple races, economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, and English learners. An overall level is determined based on the levels of these separate subgroups. Rockingham County has 15 schools at level 1 for English and 17 schools at level 1 for math. When determining the performance level for English and math in grades 3 through 8, the combined rate is used. The combined rate includes students who did not pass the SOL assessment but showed growth. The English combined rate also includes English learner students who failed the reading SOL test but showed progress towards proficiency in English as measured by the English Language Proficiency Assessment. In addition to English in grades 3 through 8, progress on the English Language Proficiency Assessment is also included in the combined rate for English at the high school level. The levels for the student engagement indicators are found in these tables. For chronic absenteeism, a level 1 represents that 15% or less of the school students were chronically absent. Having a dropout rate of less than or equal to 6% is required for a high school to earn a level 1 on this indicator. A graduation and completion index of 88 or higher is needed to earn a level 1. The GCI is calculated using a point system, which is based on the final status of students in the senior cohort. Each diploma earns 100 points. GEDs, certificates of completion, and students who are still active on the last day of school earn less points. This table shows the comparison of the state and county on-time graduation rates. The division's 2022 graduation rate was 94.5%, and the rate for Virginia was 92.1%. As shown in the chart, Rockingham County has met or exceeded the state graduation rate for the past several years. The dropout rate is not the inverse of the on-time graduation rate. In addition to graduates and dropouts, a cohort includes students who completed high school with a GED, students on long-term medical leave, students who completed high school without earning a state-recognized credential, and students who are still enrolled. The 2021-2022 dropout rates for the state and the division are shown here. As we work to continue to improve, we are focusing on reading and math instruction. We are expanding our use of authentic performance assessments and are striving to achieve effective technology integration in our classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Thank you.
I certainly do not need it this evening, but I'd like some more specific information on the achievement gap in terms of, you know, what groups, do we have a particular group or groups that are not meeting, or that there's I'd just like to see how big the gap is, I guess is what I'm stammering to say. And then maybe we can have a discussion about how we close that gap as to why that may be the case. Thank you. All right. Policy revisions, Dr. Aldifer and Ms. Williams.
Good evening, Mr. Breeden, Dr. Scheichel, and school board members. This evening, we have several policies for your information. I've kind of broken them into a couple of groups. The first 5 policies are those that we're adding some revisions to. Policy GBC is a political activities policy, and we are actually adopting the VSBA policy as they have it written. And I believe the difference that you'll see in that one is the definition of what political restrictions are as you review that policy. Policy GCBB, the supplemental pay, we're moving away from our Rockingham County policy to the VSBA policy. And the difference there is just the wording within the first paragraph of our current policy and that of the VSBA policy. GCBD-2, personal leave policy. We're staying with our Rockingham County policy, but we have updated that a bit. And you'll notice under 7B, where it talks about carrying over leave, in the previous policy, you had to be employed for an X period of time in order to do that, and now that's just becomes automatic. You get to carry that leave over each year, is the minor difference there. GCPA is a policy that talks about reduction of workforce, and again, we're updating our current Rockingham County policy. And then GDI is support staff when there are transfer requests. We're updating our Rockingham County policy. Initially, it was said that you were entitled to a move, and now it will be as you may request that move. It's not always a guarantee. As you know, many of these policies are just being updated as we review our policies on a regular basis. So we change some wording that better meets the need of the day. So most of these were just updates of Rockingham County policies, and they were all from the Personnel Department. Any questions on those updates? And then there was another group of policies that were also personnel policies that are listed there: GDBD, GDD, GDJ, GDPD. These are all policies that deal with scheduling, leave, absences, hiring, schedules. They were policies that upon review were contained within other policies. At some point in time, we had a Rockingham County policy specific to those, but upon review, we now note that they are contained within other policies, so they're just being deleted. And then the final one, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Alderford for his review of JFCF.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Chairman Breeden, members of the board, Dr. Scheichel. The policy that I'll be reviewing will be, as she mentioned, JFCF, which is alcohol and drugs in school. Unfortunately, over the course of the beginning of this year, we've seen a significant increase in the number of cases in which students have been having in possession of or using substances at school. This was a concern of ours, obviously. We spent some time talking about it with our secondary school principals, and have had an opportunity to discuss some ideas with them as far as what some changes that we may want to put in place to the policy. A few weeks ago, central office staff put together a draft of the policy. We shared that with the middle school principals and high school principals. They had a chance to provide some input. I made a couple of adjustments as well. And that is the revised policy that you have before you tonight for information. I wanted to just highlight a few of the changes, and then I'll be happy to answer questions you may have. The first change was on page 2, where there's the inclusion of THC as one of the specific substances that's listed there. That is the number one issue that we're seeing. We're seeing students with vape pens, vape devices that have THC with them. So by far, that is the thing that we're seeing the most that, as far as the increase from this year from the past. The next areas that there are some changes is in the section on penalties for substance abuse violation. Before I talk about the changes or the adjustments that we're making, I wanted to just share what the current practice is. So currently, whenever there's a situation where a student is in possession of or is under the influence of a substance, they are suspended for 10 days and they are referred to a hearing officer that will meet with them and the family during that 10-day period. That hearing officer then makes a determination about what to do with that situation, if there's a change in placement or whether there's other expectations, poor school standing, those types of things that could happen. Most often, the student is returned back to the school, and then they will be on poor school standing for some period of time. But that typically is the extent. There may be a recommendation for substance abuse counseling or training, but not always. So we wanted to make a few adjustments to that, and I'll talk about what those are in a moment. Well, I'll talk about them first and then tell you some of the rationale for them. So the proposal would be for there to be a consistent approach for any first-time offense unless a principal saw the need to send it to a hearing officer. So on a first offense, a student would be given an out-of-school suspension, or excuse me, a suspension of 10 days, which could be some combination of out-of-school suspension or in-school suspension. So that would be up to the principal's discretion, but it does allow, again, the student to be separated from other students. Again, part of that time would be out of school, but also then be in school for some period receiving services. Additionally, each student would be placed on poor school standing for 90 school days. That would be defined in policy and be consistent across the board so that all students would be receiving the same thing. And probably most importantly, each student would be required to complete a substance abuse course in order for them to eventually be removed from poor school standing. So they would be doing the 90 days of poor school standing regardless, but in order for them to be removed off of that, they would need to complete that substance abuse training, which we're partnering with ASAP in Harrisonburg, and we would be paying for that for students as well. As I mentioned before, at any point, a student, or excuse me, a principal, if they feel the need that this situation should go to the hearing officer because they believe that a potential change of placement to either Rockingham Academy or night school or some other situation would be a good option, they can do so. But in situations in which they would expect their recommendation for the student to come back to the school, that this would be, we would follow this first set of the policy. The second part of this is for any subsequent offense. In those situations, the student would automatically be referred to either the hearing officer or to the school board for possible expulsion if we felt like the need was there for that to happen. So again, that would be very similar to what our current practice is, where we bring students in. Again, they have a hearing, and then that hearing officer then makes a determination. Some of the rationale for the revision or the changes. Is number one, providing just clarity regarding the consequences. It's spelled out in policy. Students, parents, everyone knows exactly what would be the case in case a student were to, again, bring a substance, alcohol, or some drugs to school. There's transparency about what's expected, and there's consistency across the board. So those are two items. Thirdly, it would reduce the number of days that students would be out of school for such an offense. Again, they would be away from students for the entire 10 days, but it would provide some opportunity for students to be in school and in-school suspension, receiving services there. Research has supported that approach, that having kids out of school for that length of time, for 10 days, is not productive for them in any way. Importantly, as I mentioned before, it ensures the substance abuse course is taken by all students. So that's something that would be expected of them. And again, in order for them to be removed from poor school standing, they would need to complete that course through ASAP. And finally, it reduces demands on staff. So currently, the hearing officer process demands, we have 4 people who serve in that capacity. So those folks, their time is committed, as well as principals and other folks to come into the central office. In many cases, when we're pretty much doing something that about the 10 days and sending kids back. So that also saves some of their time. Again, this is a problem. We're not the only ones that are seeing this issue around the state, but it's something that we felt strongly that we needed to get a handle on. We hope, again, that a change like this will be open some kids' eyes, make sure they know what's going on, what to be expecting, and also provide some education to them for those who are in violation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions, board members?
I guess one of the changes would be them taking a substance abuse class. Is that
correct?
What we're talking about?
Mm-hmm. That would be mandated under this policy. Currently, students are able to, they're offered that option. And in those cases, they're able to take it. And if they complete it, it allows them to get off of poor school standing early. That wouldn't be an option in this case. This would be essentially for them, they would need to take it in order for them to get back onto their kind of good school standing after the 90 days.
Have you looked at it being more than 90 days? I mean, we've progressively throughout the years, it used to be that if a student had drugs on them, then they was expelled for a year. And so our standards have just continually dropped as well. So there's really no, when they make an offense in doing this, there's really no responsibility that they're being held to in such a way that they come back to school within 10 days. They only have a 90-day period when they're on poor school standing. So if they play sports, that's a reason for some of them not to do drugs while they're at school. So I would like to see it have a little bit more teeth in it, of saying, if you're going to bring drugs to school and get caught with drugs at school like this, then it's going to be more than just a 90-day slap on the wrist, come back to school, play sports and everything else. So maybe that's an idea of seeing kids not bring the drugs to school as much as to require more out of them and the responsibility that they have. So I would definitely suggest that there would be something more than just a 90-day period where they're on poor school standings.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, the 90 days is only if the student completes the substance abuse training. Right? So right now, the student may come back actually significantly sooner if they complete the training. So this is a minimum of 90 days. And then if the student does not complete the substance abuse training, it can be longer, right? And it also changes, and that's intentional, of course, that there'll be, it will alleviate this kind of constant visit to the hearing officer, and then you're going right back. Just takes up the hearing officer's time, if that's kind of the standard response. But what we're seeing is a 10-day out of school suspension, no one comes back better. Because what a student will likely do for the 10 days is that they're at home.
Have you considered night school?
Well, in this case, so it is in school, right? So what we're hoping is that instead of saying there's a 10-day break, that the student remains in school but separated in the base program or some other, so they'll be in school, right? That alone for some students is sometimes the incentive is because now, okay, and we've heard that, right? I mean, we've heard it from students. I've got my 10-day break, right? And if the student's been vaping THC at school, well, you can imagine during those 10 days that's exactly what's likely happening during those 10 days. And so changing it to in-school suspension, some people argue, well, that's not as strict. In fact, for many students, it's a disincentive, right? Because then they're still coming to school every day. And then again, for the subsequent offense, it steps it up, right? So I think it's a mix of incentive for first response, for the first incident, but then, second incident's going to be different. So it's definitely longer than it has been.
I'll also note that an adjustment was made, and this was one of the suggestions from the principals. We initially just put 90 days, and they wanted it to be clear that it was 90 school days. And the reason for that is that sometimes we would have situations where if it said 90 days or whatever the case may be, and then if the violation happened in May, and then students came back, and it was unclear whether that picked up then in September, et cetera. So this is clear that it goes for 90 school days, right? So those are the days that we're counting, not counting weekends, not counting holidays, those types of things. So that's also consistent, which would be right at exactly a semester, right? So 90 days, that's how many days we would have in a typical semester. Just a few days over, in fact.
Do we use night school?
We use night school. That is one of the options that the hearing officer would have available to them, right? And so in a second subsequent offense, when it would come to the hearing officer, they would have, and that would typically end in a change in placement. Any kind of second offense would typically end there, which would either be Rockingham Academy, night school, or in some cases we even have students at home working through online, and then they may check in at the school. So we typically try to do it in the order of kind of tier 1 would be at the school. We even have some alternative ed there. Then we would go to Rockingham Academy, which would be our tier 2, where they're in school all day. And then night school, which is only several hours, is our kind of the last resort typically.
I'm confused. I'm sorry. So the substance abuse course, is that required at this point?
Currently, it is not required.
But this would require first offense.
Would make it a requirement, correct.
So it's not just you're out for 10 days and then 90 days you're on
correct.
Bad, what's it called?
Poor school standing. Correct.
You're on poor school standing and you have to do the class.
That's correct.
Okay.
And we are providing, in fact, we're working with ASAP. They are on board with helping us with this and providing the instructor and the program. Currently, that takes place. Students get transportation to Rockingham Academy. They do that over the course of several weeks, where they can so during the school day, they can go there for several hours and get training. We're also working with them to offer it at other times, whether that be in the evening or whether it be on Saturdays, to give families options about how they would handle that.
Thank you.
Longevity has some benefits, and I've served long enough that I can remember when boards would expel students pretty quickly. And one of the things that we heard from the juvenile courts and from probation officers and others was that just tends to accelerate a vicious circle. That as kids are put out of school, that they're more likely to be seen in the courts, wind up in the penal system, because a lot of these kids, unfortunately, don't have the support structure at home to see that when they are out of school that they're doing what it is they need to be doing. And so over the years, we have found that there are other ways of keeping kids engaged in their education that doesn't just put them out there to the wolves, so to speak. And that has, at least from what I've witnessed, seems to have worked a little more effectively. That's not to say that there's not consequences. That's not to say that our our standards have decreased. It's just a difference in the methodology we use to deal with it.
Yeah, well said. And I do believe that the inclusion of a required substance abuse training is significant in this too, right? So this is something that is not just about a punishment situation. We are trying to educate kids, trying to put them in a position where they can make better decisions and understand maybe the implications of their choices.
Thank you both. We'll call if we have questions about those. Board members, you do have a financial review and attendance report and a reminder of the VSBA Capital Conference in January. If you are interested in attending that conference, contact the board clerk. And with that, we will move into other business of school board questions and reversing the order. I'll start with Mr. Cross.
Thank you. I'm sorry I had to go to the restroom. I'd like to ask Dr. Scheichel this. I got two questions. With the community dialogue group, what is the end game, would you say? What's the end game for this group at the end of it all? And when is the end date that you found with that?
That's a great question. So the purpose of the community dialogue was, of course, to create a process where we can tackle topics that are very emotional in the community, that are controversial in the community, in a respectful but also well-planned way. We started with a very small group just to see whether we can get people who really strongly disagree but have the commitment to public education in Rockingham County and also agree on the communications protocol. Basically, you speak for yourself. We don't assign, in public who said what. We focus on listening as much as we focus on speaking. And we started that very small just to see whether even 2 people, can successfully do that, or 4 people. And then we expanded it to a larger group to see whether with one facilitator who is highly qualified, whether we can really get people from across the political spectrum, social ideas, to be in these meetings. And it wasn't always easy, but really with enough work and the commitment to the process, that worked really, really well. Originally, the plan was actually to have the smaller group and then to just have a public event. The example we had seen was from New England, where there was a community event about, at that time, I think it was a healthcare related topic. And but what we found was that in the smaller group, so 20-some people, it took significant work to really get to a point where we felt like now we can take the next step. And there was somewhat of a consensus that we weren't quite ready for, full community dialogue where you say anyone. Now, in any case, people who want to participate would have to agree to that, communications protocols. We're not going to be yelling at people. We're not going to call people names. We're focusing on listening, speaking for ourselves, and again, being respectful in that dialogue. But where we can talk about all the topics that are sometimes on our minds. And, what we found was that even at 23, we weren't quite comfortable yet to say, and now let's have the full community dialogue. And so there was this idea to expand it one more time, to expand it to maybe 80 people or so, and give that a try. And if we see that that works, it's kind of a small scale version of the big community dialogue that then we can move on. And so the goal would be in the spring. So again, while we're doing this, there's student voice that's included. So 11th graders are working on a project across all 4 high schools. They will present to the board in January, just their ideas for ensuring that all students, are cared for and safe and respected in school. And then in the spring, we would have the community event. So again, where the only piece is, be willing to talk about these topics respectfully, agree to the communications protocol, and it'll be facilitated. And so what happens now is just this kind of last and immediate step. And so once we see that that works, then we can expand that. Now, long term, of course, at the event with about 80 people, we'll have a number of facilitators. They're graduate students in various areas like conflict resolution or mediation. And so they're trained for that. The people that were part of that group of 20-some people, they will also be at those tables. So we have experience, with just how the process works. And yeah, that's basically, we're experimenting with that, and it gives us a method. So the communications protocol has been developed. So once the public event happens, which I would still expect to be heavily facilitated, then there is a method in place. That's really the ultimate goal. It's not to have every conversation in the community professionally mediated. And we can get to a point where we've done it often enough that there's a process in place. Here's how we set this up. Here's what you have to agree on. Here are lots of questions that can be asked, and that can then be discussed. And so I think ultimately it's an approach to tackling difficult topics more than anything. But it's really helpful to have the expertise at the table to see how this can work at a larger and larger scale. But I fully expect there to be an event at the spring where anyone who agrees to, again, that respectful dialogue protocol is welcome to attend.
I will say that, there you go. I will say that when I looked at the dialogue group as a whole, just as who was on it, because I really didn't know who was on it for a long time. But when I saw the names of those who were on it, I am disappointed that we didn't have a broader sense of minorities sitting on this group. Like the Latino population, I believe, was totally missed out on this. Our Muslim population as well being represented on there. Our Russians, Ukrainians, we have a large number of that demographics in our community now. So I would have liked to have seen at the initial step these minorities sitting on this community dialogue, because it's very important that their voices would be heard as well. So hopefully going forward in the group, we see their voices being represented in this dialogue that we're having as a school division.
No question about it. And again, in this next step, we already have some of that expansion and a translator, right? So we have to, the logistics sometimes can get pretty complicated. We were, in the discussions early on, that was certainly part of the conversation. And sometimes, again, there's short notice and finding people that are willing to join us. It's also difficult, I think, sometimes for, especially for non-English speakers, right, to feel confident enough to go to a group where you have 20-some people discussing these political and educational topics, and to be willing to join that. And so that outreach is continuing, and then certainly that's the goal, because the more we can be reflective of the community in all its ways, the better off we will be. So no voices should be excluded. I agree with you 100%. And that will just take some heavy lifting, and certainly, that's certainly the goal. And absolutely, some groups probably underrepresented in that group of 20. But what you also find is when you look at who needs to be at the table, that 20 just isn't, you very quickly exceed that number. And so in the group with 80, that will be a little bit better. And then absolutely that outreach needs to be there to all groups. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Thank you for answering those questions. Last, I have a question. What are we doing with our concerns with security when it comes to open doors within our school, or unlocked doors throughout the school day, throughout our school division? Have we addressed that? What are we doing as a school division to make sure throughout our school day that our students and staff are safe while they're at school, in just one area, making sure the doors are locked?
Yeah, good question. And it's tricky sometimes when we talk about security posture, right? That we don't necessarily talk about that in public. But we had that conversation about, for example, when the schools are audited, for their safety posture, what happens? We've added a follow-up step to that, just like the fire marshal does, when they come through. But there's also a project underway, particularly, and again, I don't want to say too much at this point, but we're looking at a number of options, especially for securing doors. So we have an item, I believe, on the executive agenda tomorrow again to talk about that, involving different approaches to ensuring that doors are closed. It involves whether we want to go in the direction of key cards, where each individual door costs a couple $1,000 because you have to have electricity there. But then you also have alarms that don't stay open, but one key card can open all the doors someone needs to open. So those are some of the conversations we're having, but external access absolutely is one of the most critical areas.
Yeah, one of the recommendations that, of course, this is an area I worked in for almost 10 years in Rockham County Public Schools, and looking at the doors and them being open. I mean, students are leaving at the high school level, they'll prop the doors open or put the blocks in there or rocks, whatever it may be. They're going out to their car and coming back in. Those things are left in there sometimes. Teachers that have keys, they'll forget to lock them back sometimes when they come in our buildings. Different things like that. Well, an easy solution to this would be, and the SRO is not available to check doors all the time because he may be called here or there, but we do have custodial staff and other people within the buildings that could easily do a quick search in the morning time before school start to make sure those doors are locked. And then also have something accountability to where we have a sheet that's saying, yes, I checked all those doors this morning before school started, and then another time halfway through the day because there's people that are coming and going throughout the day. And I think it's important just to have this simple defense from any outside threats trying to come in our schools, just making sure that our doors are locked. And we have the personnel, we have the staff there to be able to do this. It's just something of implementing something that's very cost effective. I mean, all we're asking is them to do is to check their doors first thing in the mornings when the bell rings, that they could check it. And then maybe sometime after lunch, the last lunch block or something, is to check those doors again. That way they're safe and secure in the evening going forward, because sometimes mistakes happen. I'm not blaming anything happened, but it would be nice to have those doors checked throughout the daytime. And that is something that's just cost effective that we can do. It's easy, but it's just doing it and having that done. So I'd like to throw that in there as y'all talk about this that to at least think about that idea going forward, that there's someone checking those doors once or twice a day throughout the school day at elementary level all the way to the high school.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, we're trying to figure out the best combination between, the technical approach to it, where certain doors just, there are no keys, so we can restrict who can even open those so that they're not unlocked, and then others, the more necessary ones with maybe a key card, because again, inevitably, these approaches where you say, well, we rely on people to do the right thing. Again, we find then it just takes one, right, where that's not done. And then, of course, that's where the issue happens. So we're trying to find a combination of, and we'll certainly keep that in mind in terms of, scheduled checks. We'll pass that on.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing that. And I will say by experience that it's not just occasionally the doors are left unlocked or propped open or anything like that. So if we could address that, I'll tell you again, it is, but if we could address this issue, it's a simple address to address the doors. I mean, it's something that, it was a battle I fought all the time as a school resource officer, was making sure our doors were locked in the schools. And most definitely at the high school level, you see more of that offense happening, but it does happen at the middle and the elementary school as well. So I will say the elementary schools are harder to get into when it comes to unlocked doors. But a simple fix would be if the custodial staff or someone in the school could check those doors in the morning time before school starts, and then maybe a second time throughout the day, just going through and checking to make sure the doors are locked, someone's in there.
Yeah, and we have talked to all our principals about this school year, right, about needing to be better at that.
Thank you so much.
Follow up.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Ms. Lohr,
I'll pass, thank you.
Dr. McQuilkin.
Thank you, Mr. Breeden. I'm going to make a request that second semester, February, March, April, that we hear some presentations of the academic programs that are going on in our school division. I think we have a lot of good things happening, some new things happening, and I think that because that's what we're here for, is to educate our students, I think we would like to hear about those programs.
Absolutely.
Mr. Falk.
Dr. Scheichel, in November, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission released a report on the effects on K-12 public education in Virginia from the pandemic. And they list everything from chronic absenteeism to mental health issues among students to the difficulty in finding teachers and retaining teachers, and the fact that fewer people are getting certified to teach in Virginia, and just all of those issues. And could you give us some idea of how we stand on those circumstances that are contained in the JLARC report?
Yeah, so the JLARC report, there were a number of news articles about 2 weeks ago, or even last week, related to it. And there was really interesting information. And unfortunately, as with many things, so JLARC is nonpartisan. So that's a really research organization that doesn't lean, one way or the other. It gets politicized very quickly. When no one was surprised that during the pandemic, for example, academic achievement as measured in standardized tests that cover, let's say, 5th grade, right? That those achievement scores would be lower than they were before the pandemic, and even coming back, right? So even now, we still see achievement scores below what they were pre-pandemic, and it makes a lot of sense because what we said to teachers specifically is, let's not focus on these tests that we sometimes teach to that are focused on just teaching that 5th grade curriculum. These 5th graders, the last normal year in school, was 3rd grade. So or 2nd grade. What do we do for what they missed in 3rd and 4th, and to fill in those gaps and then move forward, because these are long-term projects really of recovery. And so that's what we focused on. But then when you listen to what the politicians are saying, it's immediately, students are not achieving. We need to have tougher standards. We need to punish schools, for not achieving. When what we really find is that school divisions that focus on kind of these long-term recovery plans may be doing students, a better service than to simply say, oh, you didn't learn all the 5th grade stuff. Yeah, because you missed, 3rd and 4th to a large extent. And so what we have done is make sure that teachers focus on ensuring that, their students are okay, first of all, mental behavioral health. We see that in many school districts. It's not, we've seen it too, an increase in disciplinary issues, but you have talked to superintendents all the time. It's massive in some school districts. And for us, with the way we approached it, we already had a system in place, to really focus on mental behavioral health first. Students had to learn how to be in school again. We needed to make sure teachers are okay. And so for us, we have the tiered systems of support piece in place. And other school divisions, they quickly realized they needed that. And so they focused on throwing a lot of ESSER money at additional staff in mental behavioral health. But they also realized that, you wait another year and a half, that money is gone. And so what are they going to do then? So they're just hoping for additional state money because our tiered systems structure is fully funded. We don't have that concern. It's going to be here. And so we're in a good position for that. When it comes to learning recovery, realizing what's really, really important. You saw some of the accreditation stuff, where you looked at science. Well, it's because when you come back and you have these kids that didn't have, 2nd, 3rd grade or 3rd, 4th grade, whatever it may be, we need to focus on literacy, right? So science maybe did take a little bit of a backseat, but in many cases, there was an additional focus on we need to get a reading right. That's the most fundamental skill. We need to focus on how can we make all students successful in math. And I will say, when it comes to our reading instruction, when you look at the PAL scores, for example, the spring PAL scores for kindergartners, so for the students that were in kindergarten in 2019, but then the kindergartners this past year. So the first time we see them, how much our new reading program is already paying dividends. So even after a difficult year like we had last year, our kindergarten PAL scores, we had fewer kids below benchmark last year than we had pre-pandemic. And so that's kindergarten. And then we saw the same thing when you looked at growth within the year, how much our teachers are working to look at where students are and then move them ahead. When you look at students that, when they come in, are below benchmark in PALS, and then the higher benchmark is in the spring, how many of the students that were below benchmark in the fall then made it above benchmark? We did better last year than we did pre-pandemic. So these, this focus on reading. So we have to be very careful, when we look at reading SOL scores, because that test's not matched with what we taught that year. And so, focusing on where the kids are and what's needed. And so when it comes to achievement, absolutely, we saw a drop, and we're working very hard to address that. When you talk about behaviors, having mental and behavioral support there, that's continuing, and where we have experts that do that and have first responders, with our behavior support assistants, and this medical model, with behavior specialists, BCBAs, psychologists, social workers, counselors, and so on. And so I think that gets us well prepared for that. And really the piece that's also clearly visible is, like you said, the enormous teacher shortage. And again, because of the work of our HR department and what our principals do and how we treat our employees, we don't see it quite yet to the same extent that other school divisions do. Ms. Lohr was at the legislative breakfast with me. Shenandoah County is half the size of Rockingham County, and they had 17 openings for teachers, right? 17 at this point of the school year, right? And we have 3. And so that's a big difference, right? So again, what we've talked about is being a destination division. And when they looked at so at the end of last year, more than 10,000 teachers left the profession, whether that's, for a number of reasons, including retirees, but 10,000 fewer teachers, but then only about 8,000 new ones came in. And so there are lots and lots of classrooms in Virginia without a qualified educator. And so you want to focus on student achievement. You first have to address to have a highly qualified person in the room. And it's historically really been for the same reasons that teachers leave the profession. Education schools don't graduate as many students anymore. And the factors are certainly pay, and the General Assembly addressed that with the governor's budget. So Governor Youngkin in the budget, that 5% pay increase 2 years in a row. So, but we were able to make it 7% here, for teachers, to make sure that, again, we acknowledge that, but pay isn't the only thing. It's time with colleagues, time available to actually plan, and then also a major factor when they looked at the feedback that JLARC got was a respect. Right? Respect, of course, from the school division, from administrators, but also respect from the public. We saw that very quickly, teachers being the heroes for turning on a dime, and in the spring of 2020, making at least some educational opportunities available, even though the state shut down the education programs. But then that very quickly became very critical of teachers. And it is a little bit concerning right now that, and this is, again, we've said a lot of good things about, for example, the lab school model, the funding for that's coming out of Richmond, the focus on the science of reading. So lots of good things, but there are also concerns. And right now it is not showing appropriate respect to the professional educators. The new history and social studies standards are up for review, and they were developed in collaboration with educators for years. We had African American history committee, we had all this input from superintendents, from teachers, from families on what social studies standards should be, and that they address more of, this place-based learning we've talked about, where we really look at local history, where we allow students to bring their own family's history, and whether that's through some of the inquiries or, the project with the national park, at East Rockingham High School. And that's completely kind of been shut down. So this week on Thursday, the new social science standards are coming to the Board of Education, which makes the ultimate decision. And DOE had been dragging their feet now for a couple of months. And finally, the board said, we want to see these standards. And so rather than saying, okay, we'll bring them and then we can talk about what may need to change, without anyone knowing, no teachers, no superintendents, no one was contacted about this. At the last minute, they just had an outside organization rewrite them, where all of a sudden Martin Luther King Jr. disappears from the elementary curriculum in social studies, where there are numerous historical errors in the document, and it was done without asking educators. And in addition to what we had with the tip line, right, that's showing disrespect to the profession. And I think we have to be very, very careful. There are all kinds of conversations to be had and discussions. And so respect for teachers is critical. And while we still have highly qualified applicants in the school division, if that gets worse, right, when you have 1 or 2 applicants, we used to have 20 or 30 for each position. Now you're down to maybe having 1, 2, 3 applicants for a position. That goes to 0 very quickly, right, if more and more people leave the profession. And so I think the JLARC study pointed to things across the picture, whether that's student behavior, where we have to have these structures in place, whether that's achievement, where we really have to focus on what are the really important skills that kids need, particularly literacy and math. So when we talk about reading, writing, arithmetic, right, it's not that far off from that. I mean, these are the key pieces, but certainly then you have science, social studies, fine arts, PE, all the other things. But we need to make sure that we, align what we do with what kids need. And then, respect for the profession, I think, is important. And so the JLARC study came at a time when it's sorely needed to bring these topics into the public conversation. And again, we're trying to address all of that. Even, again, when we talk about respectful community dialogue, I think it goes a long way when, as educators, we engage with the community in a respectful way and can discuss differences in philosophy, but do it in a way where we don't feel like as educators we're attacked, or that the profession is attacked, right? And so it was an important commission report, and I think everyone's now trying to address it. But again, these are all pieces that we're working on daily.
For those interested in seeing the report, you can find it at jlarc.virginia spelled out .gov, and then go to the area that says reports. And it's a very informative and well done piece, and it outlines all of the challenges that are being faced. And I was, in reading it over, the part that impressed me was under what we recommend and in legislative and executive action. And these are things that Rockingham has done for the past 4 years or 5 years to prepare. We didn't know that we were preparing for a pandemic, but we were just doing what, studied best practices indicate you do, and that has helped. Thank you.
Dr. Shuck?
Pass.
Okay. I'll be brief because as we have in our closed meeting motion, we do have consultation with legal counsel, and they're sitting and waiting, and they don't wait cheaply, if cheaply is a word. But to get back to the community dialogue pieces, I have noticed, particularly with the mushrooming of social media, that it has become more and more challenging through the limited structure of board meetings to have meaningful dialogue with people at meetings, because there's just so much information, good and correct and incorrect that you would spend your time dealing with. And there was one meeting at Spotswood, I think sometime in 2020, where there were people shouting at one another in the audience and demanding answers from the board. And I offered to stay. I said, the other board members have to go into closed session, but I'll stay and answer questions to the best of my ability. I can't speak for the entire board, but I could tell that people wanted to have dialogue. And 4 people stayed. And I took from that, I went to Dr. Scheichel and I said, we've got to come up with some mechanism for people to be able to have dialogue about this stuff and understand what's accurate and what's not accurate without just having this deal where this side of the room is trying to outshout the other side of the room. And, but we quickly realized, I think, that unless you had some sort of mediation in the middle, that could very well happen. It could just be a shouting match because people believe very passionately on both sides of most issues. And so that was my thinking in terms of where we were going with it, to try to provide a mechanism for people to talk to one another, and perhaps that would expand into how we dealt with our meetings and how we communicated with folks. I mean, that was kind of what I was envisioning with that. But I also agree with Dr. McQuilkin that I would very much welcome us getting back to the topic of education and educating our kids. We lost a little over a year to the pandemic. And it seems like for the last 10 or 11 months, we've dealt with socio-political issues. And I'm not saying they don't have merit. I'm just saying that we've had very few substantive issues that I can recall among this board about how we educate kids. So, you know, I would appreciate a refresher on, as we look at the kids who have fallen behind, you know, what are we doing to identify those kids? What are we doing to catch them up? And it all goes into that achievement gap thing, I suppose. You know, and what's the next thing that we might be able to do to make sure that that we don't have anybody falling behind? And so I would welcome that conversation very much. And I've heard school board meetings, unfortunately, someone described them to me lately as a circus. And as the ringmaster of this circus for at least 2 more meetings, I will do my best to try to bring us back to the topic of education. So thank you all for that. We do have reason to enter into closed meeting, and I will entertain a motion in that regard. Thank everyone. Thank you all for sticking with us. The students, I know you heard more that you probably wanted to hear, but we thank you for sticking with us, and the rest of you for coming as well. So I will entertain a motion to enter closed meeting if it be your desire.
I move that the board enter a closed meeting to discuss and consider the following pursuant to the provisions of Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711. A1, personnel, specific public officers, appointees, or employees, including the division superintendent, for the purpose of considering such individuals' assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, salary, or resignation. And A8, consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel.
Thank you, Ms. Lohr. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Falk. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that is unanimous. Thank you. Everyone, please be safe driving home.
And if we could find some money in the budget for Eaton here, that would be